The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the marrow of her bones, and a voice that whispered of endless silent sleep beneath a blanket of white. Alara knew its language well. For 5 winters, she had been its sole student in this lonely stretch of the northern mountains, a ghost with white hair and pale skin, almost indistinguishable from the blizzards that tried to claim her. Her small, rickety cabin was a defiance, a single stubborn heartbeat against the overwhelming emptiness. Inside, the fire was a pathetic flicker, consuming the last of her scavenged wood, with a greedy hunger that matched the gnawing in her own stomach. She was not entirely alone. Curled in a worn basket by the dying hearth were 2 small bundles of fur, the only souls in the world who did not see her as a curse. They were wolf cubs, orphaned by a rogue attack that had swept through the lower valley weeks ago. Alara had found them shivering and mewling beside their mother's cold body, and, without a second thought, had scooped them into her thin coat and brought them home. She had named them Flicker and Ash, for the fire that kept them alive. They were her purpose, the tiny anchors that kept her from simply walking out into the snow and letting it swallow her whole. Stirring the watery broth in the pot more melted snow than anything else, she felt the familiar ache of memory rise within her. It was a cold that no fire could touch. It was the memory of another kind of coldness, the icy contempt in the eyes of her pack, the Blackwood pack. She had been born an omen, a disruption to their dark-furred uniformity, an albino, a creature of stark white in a world of shadow and earth. Her parents, before a border skirmish had stolen them, had loved her fiercely but had always hidden her away, ashamed of the genetic flaw that marked their bloodline. They had taught her to be invisible, to make herself small, to apologize for the space she occupied. The ultimate rejection had come on the night of her 18th birthday, the night of the mating ceremony. She had stood before the pack, her heart a frantic bird in her chest, daring to hope. Marcus, the new alpha, strode before her. He was handsome, powerful, the wolf every female dreamed of. For a fleeting, impossible moment, his eyes had met hers, and a spark, a faint whisper of the mate bond, had flickered between them. Hope had surged through her like a spring thaw. But then he had sneered. The disgust on his face was a physical blow. He had turned to the entire pack, his voice booming with authority and disdain. The moon goddess would not curse me with such a flawed, weak mate. A ghost, a worthless omega, who cannot even bear the sun without burning. I, Marcus, alpha of the Blackwood pack, reject this thing. She is no one. The words had shattered her. The faint thread of the bond had not just been cut, it had been doused in acid, leaving a searing permanent scar on her soul. He had cast her out that very night, declaring her a blight that would bring ruin to them all. So she had fled, with his laughter echoing behind her, and had run until her lungs burned and the world was nothing but white. A sudden, violent gust of wind rattled the cabin's single window, pulling her from the icy grip of the past. The storm was worsening, its howl growing deeper, more menacing. Flicker and Ash whimpered in their basket, and she went to them, stroking their soft fur. "Shh, little ones," she murmured, her voice hoarse from disuse. "It is just the wind. I am here." But the words felt hollow. She was just a girl, starving and alone. What protection could she truly offer? Her own stomach growled, a painful, empty cramp. She had given the last of the dried meat to the cubs yesterday. The broth was for them, too. She could last another day. She had to, but the cold was relentless, seeping through the cracks in the walls. and the woodpile outside was gone. To survive the night, she needed more fuel. Pulling her threadbare cloak tighter, she steeled herself. The thought of facing the blizzard was terrifying, a dance with death itself. But the thought of the cubs freezing was worse. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door, and the world dissolved into a maelstrom of screaming wind and blinding snow. The force of it threw her back a step. It was a fool's errand. She knew it. But she stepped out anyway, leaning into the gale, her pale eyes squinting against the assault. The forest edge was only 50 yards away, but it might as well have been a different continent. Every step was a battle, the snowdrift sucking at her worn boots, the wind tearing the air from her lungs. She was a wraith, a fragile piece of ice, in a world being broken apart by the storm. Suddenly, above the shriek of the wind, another sound cut through the chaos. It was a howl, not the howl of a pack calling to one another, but a deep, guttural cry of pure agony. It was close, too close. Her survival instincts, honed by years of solitude and fear, screamed at her to turn back, to bolt the door and hide. Rogues often hunted in these storms, using the cover of the blizzard to ambush prey. But there was a quality to this sound, a profound note of suffering that resonated with the scars on her own soul. It was the sound of a creature utterly and completely alone in its pain. She hesitated, her body trembling with more than just the cold. To go back to the cabin was safety, logic. To go toward the sound was madness. But then she thought of Flicker and Ash, helpless and alone before she found them. What if this was another soul the world had thrown away? Her compassion, the one part of her that Marcus had never been able to break, made the decision for her. She turned her face toward the sound and pushed forward, one agonizing step at a time, into the heart of the storm. She found him near a rocky outcrop, a colossal shape half buried in a snowdrift. It was a wolf, but larger than any she had ever seen, bigger even than Marcus in his shifted form. His fur was a brilliant, startling white, the same shade as her own hair, now stained crimson along his flank and shoulder. A deep gash, crusted with frozen blood, marred his side, and his breathing was a shallow, ragged rasp. His eyes were closed, his great head resting in the snow. He was dying. Fear warred with an overwhelming wave of empathy. He was magnificent even in this broken state. He was like her, a creature of white in a world that did not seem to want him. She saw a piece of a shattered arrow shaft protruding from the wound in his shoulder, slick with dark blood. Rogues, then. They must have ambushed him. Her mind raced. She could leave him. It was the sensible thing to do. She had nothing to offer, no strength to spare. Trying to save him would likely kill them both. But his ear twitched. A faint, almost imperceptible movement, and a low groan escaped his throat. It was the sound that had called to her, the sound of a life clinging desperately to its last embers. She could not leave him. She would not. Kneeling beside him, the snow soaking through her thin trousers, she placed a trembling hand on his massive head. His fur was thick, but a dangerous cold radiated from his body. Hypothermia was setting in. "I will not let you die," she whispered, the words snatched away by the wind. Not like this. Not alone. The next hour was a blur of excruciating effort. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. She looped the thin rope she used for hauling firewood under his forelegs and pulled. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her lungs burned with the frigid air, and her vision swam with black spots. She fell again and again, her face hitting the snow. But each time she got up, gasping and sobbing with exertion, and pulled again. It was a slow, torturous crawl back to the cabin, a tiny, determined ghost, dragging a fallen giant through the end of the world. Somehow, miraculously, they made it. She collapsed just inside the door, her body a symphony of pain. But there was no time to rest. With the last of her strength, she managed to heave his massive form closer to the hearth. The cubs, awakened by the commotion, peered nervously from their basket at the enormous newcomer. She stoked the fire with the few remaining chips of wood, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold them. The wolf's wounds were severe. The arrow needed to come out. Taking a deep breath, she heated the blade of her small skinning knife in the flames until it glowed red. Tearing a strip from the hem of her own tunic for something to bite down on seemed absurd, but she gently pushed the cloth toward his mouth. He was barely conscious, but his jaws opened slightly, accepting the gesture. "This is going to hurt," she said softly, her voice a soothing murmur. "I am so sorry." With a prayer to a moon goddess she no longer believed in, she gripped the arrow shaft and pulled. It came free with a sickening sound, followed by a fresh gush of hot blood. The wolf convulsed, a deep growl of agony rumbling in his chest, but he did not snap at her. She pressed another strip of cloth, one she'd soaked in the last of her medicinal herbs, against the wound, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed to a sluggish ooze. The gash on his side was just as bad, long and deep, likely from a poisoned blade. She cleaned it as best she could, her touch gentle and sure, her movements economical. She had learned much about healing from the forest, out of necessity. All through the long, dark night, she tended to him. She used the last of her broth, coaxing a few spoonfuls between his lips. She covered him with her own thin blanket, choosing to huddle closer to the fire herself, shivering. As the hours passed and the storm raged on outside, a strange sense of peace settled over her. In the dim, flickering light, she talked to him, her voice quiet and constant. "You are so beautiful," she confessed to the unconscious wolf. "Your fur, it is like the heart of the snow. They called me a ghost for being this color, a bad omen. Maybe we are a pair." She laughed, a small broken sound. "I do not know why I am doing this. I have nothing. I am nothing, just a rejected omega, living at the edge of the world. But when I heard you cry out, I could not bear it. I know what it is to be in pain and have no one answer." She told him of Marcus, of the shame, of the endless aching loneliness that was her constant companion. She spoke of her dreams, the simple ones of a warm meal, a kind word, a place to belong. She laid her entire broken soul bare to this stranger, this creature of myth and moonlight who had fallen into her life. As dawn approached, his breathing began to even out, the dangerous rasp fading into a deep, steady rhythm. She placed a hand on his flank and felt a faint, thrumming warmth beneath his skin. It was a spark of life, a spark she had nurtured, exhausted, beyond measure. She finally slumped against his side, her head resting on his great white shoulder, and fell into a dreamless sleep. Sunlight, pale and watery, was what woke her. The storm had broken. For a moment, she was disoriented, her body stiff and cold. Then she remembered. She sat up with a jolt, her eyes immediately finding the white wolf. He was still sleeping, but his chest rose and fell with a powerful, steady beat. A wave of relief, so potent it made her dizzy, washed over her. He had survived the night. The cubs were awake, watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Suddenly, Ash, the bolder of the two, toddled out of the basket and hesitantly approached the giant wolf. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat, but before she could intervene, the little cub nudged its nose against the wolf's massive paw and gave a soft, questioning whine. The great wolf's ear twitched. Slowly, one of his eyelids fluttered open. An eye of pure, molten silver regarded the tiny cub with an intelligence that startled her. Then, unbelievably, he let out a soft, low chuff, a sound of reassurance. Ash, satisfied, curled up against his paw and promptly fell asleep. Ilara watched, mesmerized. This was no ordinary wolf. The sheer power radiating from him, even as he lay wounded, was unlike anything she had ever felt. It dwarfed the aura of her former alpha Marcus. It was ancient, primal, absolute. A tremor of fear, different from before, ran through her. Who had she brought into her home? Her question was answered by a sound from outside. Voices, many of them, sharp and commanding, carried on the crisp morning air. Then came the crunching of boots on fresh snow. They were close. Panic seized her. Rogues, coming back to finish the job? Or perhaps the wolf's pack, come to rescue him? Either way, they would not look kindly on a lone Omega with their injured companion. They would see her as a threat, a scavenger. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She had to hide. But where? The cabin was a single room. Her eyes darted around frantically, but it was too late. The door burst open, and the small space was suddenly filled with enormous, imposing figures. They were wolves, all in human form, dressed in black and silver armor that bore the crest of a snarling wolf's head against a full moon. They were warriors, their faces hard, their eyes scanning the room with lethal efficiency. She recognized the crest. It was the symbol of the royal guard, the personal retinue of the Alpha King himself. Ilara froze, her blood turning to ice water in her veins. The Alpha King's territory was hundreds of miles south. What were they doing here? Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was trespassing, a packless Omega on royal lands. The punishment for that alone was death. A man who was clearly their leader, his face etched with worry and a jagged scar across one eye, stepped forward. His gaze swept over her, dismissive and cold, before landing on the white wolf by the fire. His eyes widened in shock, then flooded with profound relief. "My king," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He and all the other warriors immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in deference. "King?" Ilara's mind struggled to process the word. This wolf was the Alpha King? The legendary Lycaon, ruler of all the packs in the northern continent? The wolf who was said to be a demigod? A warrior who had never known defeat? It was impossible. He was a story, a myth whispered around campfires. As if summoned by their presence, the great white wolf stirred. He lifted his head, his silver eyes now fully open and alert. He looked at his kneeling men, then his gaze shifted, landing on her. She flinched, expecting anger, accusation. Instead, his expression was one of quiet contemplation. Then, a light began to emanate from him, a soft, silver glow that filled the tiny cabin. Ilara shielded her eyes as the light intensified, pulsing with raw, untamed power. She heard the sickening, yet fascinating sound of bones shifting and reforming, of muscle and sinew contracting and expanding. When the light faded, the wolf was gone. In his place stood a man. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of the tattered remnants of his clothes. His skin was pale, like alabaster, and his face was a masterpiece of sharp aristocratic angles and raw masculine power. But it was his hair that made Alara's breath catch in her throat. It was stark white, the color of fresh snow, cascading over his shoulders like a winter waterfall. And his eyes, the same molten silver as the wolf's, were fixed on her with an intensity that seemed to see right through to her fractured soul. He was an albino, just like her. The scarred warrior, his beta, rose to his feet. King Lycaon, we tracked the rogues. They have been dealt with. We feared the worst when we found your trail vanished. Lycaon did not look away from Alara. I would have perished, Kale, he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that vibrated through the floorboards and up into her bones. The poison was potent. The cold was finishing its work. He took a step toward her, and she instinctively took a step back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of terror and awe. He stopped, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "This Omega," he said, his gaze never leaving her face. "She saved me." Kale and the other guards finally turned their full attention to her. Their expressions were a mixture of shock and disbelief. An Omega? This slip of a girl, this pale outcast, had saved their invincible king? It was unthinkable. Lycaon's silver eyes softened as he looked at her. He saw the fear in her posture, the deep, ingrained self-loathing in the way she hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller. And then, as their eyes held, it happened. A jolt, powerful and undeniable, shot through her. It was a current of pure energy, a blaze of warmth that chased away the perpetual chill in her soul. It was recognition on a level she could not comprehend, a feeling of a lock clicking into place, of a long-lost piece of herself suddenly being found. It was the mate bond, slamming into her with the force of a tidal wave. Lycaon's expression transformed. Awe, reverence, and a fierce, possessive joy lit his features from within, making him breathtaking. He took another step, closing the distance between them. "Mate," he breathed, the single word holding a universe of longing and certainty. Alara's world tilted on its axis. The warmth was instantly replaced by a surge of pure, cold panic. No, it could not be. This was a mistake, a cruel joke by a goddess she despised. She shook her head, stumbling backward until her back hit the rough-hewn wall of the cabin. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are wrong. It is impossible. The moon goddess does not make mistakes," Lycaon stated, his voice gentle but firm, a king making a decree. "I have waited centuries for you. I felt you, the moment you touched me, a flicker of light in the darkness. I felt your kindness as you cared for me. You are mine." "No!" The word was a strangled cry, torn from the depths of her terror. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. "You do not understand. I am broken. I am a rejected Omega, a curse. My own Alpha cast me out because I was worthless. I am nothing." The words she had internalized for years came tumbling out, a litany of her own perceived failings. She was a ghost, a flaw, a creature of bad luck. She was not worthy of being a mate to a simple pack member, let alone a king. Lycaon listened to her desperate, painful confession, his expression hardening, not at her, but at the world that had done this to her. When she finished, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, he closed the final few feet between them. He did not touch her, but his presence was a wall of warmth and safety she had never known. "They called you worthless for this?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching a strand of her white hair. A jolt, A pleasant echo of the bond's formation sparked between them. They called you a curse for the very mark of the moon itself? He then gestured to his own magnificent white hair. Am I cursed, Ilara? Am I a flaw? She could only stare, speechless. He was the most beautiful, powerful man she had ever seen. His albinism was not a mark of shame. It was a crown, a symbol of his unique and terrible power. The fools who cast you out were blind, he continued, his silver eyes burning with a conviction that stripped away her defenses. They threw away a diamond because they were too ignorant to see its worth beneath the dust. You are not weak. You faced a blizzard alone to gather wood for 2 cubs that are not yours. You dragged a wolf 3 times your size to safety. You fought off death and poison with nothing but herbs and your own fierce will. You poured out your soul to a stranger because your heart is so full of compassion, it has no room for malice. You, Ilara, are the strongest person I have ever met. Every word was a balm on her wounded spirit. Every sentence chipped away at the icy walls she had built around her heart. He did not see a flaw. He saw strength. He did not see a curse. He saw a queen. The tears that fell now were not of shame, but of a fragile, burgeoning hope she had thought long dead. He turned his head slightly, addressing his men without ever taking his eyes off her. Kale, this is Ilara, my mate, your future queen. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the guards. Kale's scarred face registered a moment of pure shock before it settled into one of absolute acceptance. He and the others immediately went down on one knee again, but this time their obeisance was directed not just at him, but at her. My queen, Kale said, his voice filled with a new profound respect. Ilara felt dizzy, her hand coming up to brace herself against the wall. Queen. The word was alien, impossible. It was a role for someone else, someone strong and whole, not a broken girl hiding in the mountains. But as she looked at Lycaon, at the unwavering belief in his eyes, a tiny trembling part of her wondered if, just maybe, he was right. The journey to the royal palace was a surreal dream. Lycaon had insisted on carrying her, stating she was exhausted and in no condition to walk. Nestled against his powerful chest, wrapped in the thick fur-lined cloak of one of his guards, she had felt a sense of safety that was so foreign it was almost painful. The world outside his embrace seemed distant and muted. They traveled with a speed and silence that was unnerving, a silver and black tide of warriors moving through the snow-laden forest. When they arrived, her breath was stolen away. The palace was not a building. It was a mountain carved into a fortress, a breathtaking structure of white stone and gleaming silver that seemed to have grown from the rock itself. It touched the sky, its towers piercing the clouds. It was a place of myth and legend, and she was being brought into its heart. Inside, she was even more overwhelmed. Halls of polished marble stretched into the distance, tapestries depicting epic battles hung on the walls, and the air was filled with the scent of beeswax and herbs. Servants and pack members stopped and bowed as they passed, their eyes wide with curiosity as they looked at her, the strange white-haired girl held in the king's arms. She felt like a field mouse brought into a lion's den, her threadbare clothes and worn boots a stark contrast to the casual opulence surrounding her. Lycaon took her to a suite of rooms that was larger than her entire cabin. A fire roared in a stone fireplace. A bed was piled high with soft furs, and a balcony overlooked a snow-covered valley that glittered under the proselytes. Afternoon Sunday. He set her down gently, his hands lingering on her arms for a moment, as if reluctant to let her go. You will be safe here, he said, his voice soft. Rest. Heal. No one will harm you. A servant girl with kind eyes and a nervous energy helped her with a bath. The hot water, scented with lavender, was a luxury so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She scrubbed away the grime of the wilderness, of her old life, and watched the dirt spiral down the drain. The clothes laid out for her were made of soft wool and velvet, in shades of silver and deep blue that complemented her pale coloring. When she looked at her reflection in the silver-backed mirror, she barely recognized the person staring back. The grime was gone, but the fear and uncertainty still haunted her eyes. She looked less like a queen and more like a ghost playing dress-up. Over the next few days, Lycaon was the soul of patience. He seemed to understand the deep-seated terror that held her captive. He did not push her, did not demand she accept the bond or her new role. Instead, he simply was. He was there. He invited her to share meals with him in a private dining room, simple affairs where he spoke of his kingdom, of the needs of his people, asking for her opinions. He took her to the royal library, a vast circular room filled with thousands of scrolls and books, and watched with a gentle smile as her eyes lit up with wonder. He showed her the palace gardens, encased in a massive glass dome, where summer flowers bloomed in defiance of the winter outside. Slowly, cautiously, Alara began to let her guard down. She found herself talking to him, telling him more about her life in the mountains, about the cubs she had raised. He listened intently, his focus on her absolute. He told her he had already dispatched a patrol to her cabin to retrieve Flicker and Ash, promising they would have a home in a special sanctuary he would build for them here. His kindness was a constant, gentle warmth, slowly melting the permafrost that had encased her heart for so long. But the fear was a stubborn, deep-rooted weed. Every time she started to feel comfortable, to believe in the reality of this new life, the voice of Marcus would echo in her mind. Worthless, flawed, a curse. She had been rejected once, so cruelly and publicly. What was to stop it from happening again? Lycaon was a king. He needed a strong, confident Luna, a warrior, and a diplomat. Not a timid, scarred Omega who was afraid of her own shadow. The mate bond pulled her toward him with an irresistible gravity, but her past was a powerful anchor holding her in place. How could she trust this? How could she believe that she was truly worthy of a king's love when she had never even felt worthy of a simple life? One evening, as they sat by the fire in the library, she finally voiced her deepest fear. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could have any she-wolf in the world, a powerful alpha female, a princess from another kingdom. Why choose someone who is broken?" Lycaon set down his book and turned his full attention to her. The firelight danced in his silver eyes. "I did not choose you, Alara. The goddess did. And she did not give me someone broken. She gave me someone who had been bent, but refused to break. She gave me a mate with a heart so pure it shines brighter than any crown. Your compassion is not a weakness, it is the rarest of strengths. Your resilience is more formidable than any army. I do not want an alpha female who leads with brute force. I want a queen who will rule with kindness, who understands suffering and will therefore know how to heal it. I want you." His words were a powerful current, threatening to sweep away her last defenses. She wanted to believe him, wanted it more than anything, but the scars on her soul were deep. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet the conviction in his gaze. "I am afraid," she admitted, the confession costing her dearly. "I am so afraid of being hurt again." He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her small, trembling hands in his large, warm ones. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She lifted her head, her pale eyes meeting his. "I swear on my life, on my crown, and on the soul of my wolf," he said, his voice resonating with an unbreakable oath. "I will never hurt you. I will spend the rest of my existence proving that you are cherished, that you are valued, and that you are loved. The choice to accept this bond is yours and yours alone. I will wait for as long as it takes." In that moment, she was closer to believing than ever before. But fate, it seemed, had one final test for her. The next day, a formal delegation was announced. It was from a neighboring territory, a pack seeking a trade alliance. The Blackwood Pack. Alara was on a balcony, overlooking the main courtyard when they arrived, and the sight of their banner, a snarling black wolf on a field of gray, made her blood run cold. And there, at the head of the delegation, riding as if he owned the world, was Marcus. Panic, raw and absolute, clawed at her throat. She stumbled back from the railing, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to hide. He could not see her here. He would ruin everything. He would tell the king what she was, what everyone thought of her, and Lycaon would see his mistake. He would see that she was nothing but a worthless, rejected Omega after all. She fled back to her rooms, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was a coward. After everything Lycaon had said, after all his reassurances, the mere sight of her tormentor sent her scurrying back into the shadows. The self-loathing was suffocating. A knock came at her door. It was Lycaon. He must have sensed her distress through the bond, which hummed constantly between them now, a low thrum of connection. "Alara, may I come in?" She opened the door, unable to hide the terror on her face. He took one look at her, and his expression hardened, his silver eyes turning stormy. "What is it? What has frightened you?" "They are here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The Blackwood Pack. Marcus, he is here." Lycaon's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He understood immediately. "He cannot harm you here," he stated, his voice a low growl. "This is my home. You are under my protection." "You do not understand," she cried, frustration and fear making her reckless. "He will tell you things about me. He will expose me for what I am. He will make you see." "Make me see what?" Lycaon interrupted, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. He gently gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "That you were abused by a fool? That you were judged by the ignorant? I already know these things, Alara, and it only makes me value you more. There is nothing that arrogant pup can say that will ever change what I know to be true." He paused, his gaze intense. "I am to receive them in the Persenon throne room. I want you to be there, by my side." "No, I cannot," she protested, trying to pull away. "Yes, you can," he insisted, his voice leaving no room for argument, yet still managing to be gentle. "You are not that scared girl hiding in the mountains anymore. You are the future queen of this kingdom. It is time he and everyone else saw that. I will not let him touch you. I will not let him even speak a single disrespectful word to you. Stand with me, please." Looking into his determined silver eyes, she saw not a request, but a lifeline. He was not asking her to be strong for him. He was offering her his strength, a shield behind which she could finally stand up straight. Taking a shaky breath, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A proud, fierce smile touched Lycaon's lips. "Good," he said. "Let us go and greet our guests." The throne room was an immense cavern of polished stone and silver inlay. Lycaon sat on a throne carved from a single piece of white weirwood. A throne that seemed to radiate power. Another, slightly smaller but equally beautiful throne, sat empty beside it. He had her stand on the dais just to his right, a position of honor and authority. The royal guard lined the walls, a silent, intimidating presence. Her heart was a frantic drum, but standing so close to Lycaon, feeling the steady, reassuring thrum of his power, she felt a sliver of courage take root in her soul. The great doors opened, and the Blackwood delegation entered. Marcus strode in first, his posture arrogant, his eyes sweeping the room with a practiced air of appraisal. He was flanked by his beta and several other warriors. He stopped before the throne and gave a shallow, barely respectful bow. "Alpha King Lycaon," he began, his voice oily and smooth. "It is an honor to be received. I am Alpha Marcus of the Blackwood Pack, and we have come to discuss." His voice trailed off as his eyes finally landed on her. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dark, contemptuous amusement. A cruel smirk spread across his lips. "Well, well," he said, his tone dripping with condescension as he straightened up, all pretense of respect gone. "I see you have found a new stray for your collection, Your Majesty. Though I am surprised you would allow such a creature to stand so close to the throne." Ilara flinched as if struck. The word stray was a poisoned dart, aimed at the heart of her insecurities. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her, and the familiar, burning shame rose in her cheeks. Lycaon remained perfectly still on his throne, but the temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. His silver eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "You will watch your tongue, Alpha Marcus," he warned, his voice deceptively soft, yet laced with deadly menace. "You are a guest in my court. You will show the proper respect." Marcus, blinded by his own arrogance and his history with Ilara, failed to heed the blank warning. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Respect? For what? For her?" He pointed a dismissive finger at Ilara. "King Lycaon, surely you have been deceived. This is Ilara, a worthless albino omega from my pack. A creature so flawed and weak I was forced to cast her out myself. She is a bad omen. She has no place here, sullying your palace with her presence." He took a step forward, his expression turning possessive and cruel. "Come here, Ilara. Have you no shame? Apologize to the king for bothering him, and I may consider allowing you to return to the pack as a servant." He reached out, his hand aiming to grab her arm, to drag her down from the dais and reassert his dominance over her. That was his final, fatal mistake. Before his fingers could even brush her sleeve, a wave of power, pure and suffocating, erupted from the throne. It was Lycaon's alpha command, magnified 1,000 times, a physical force that slammed into the Blackwood delegation like a battering ram. Marcus, his men cried out as they were violently forced to their knees, their faces pressed into the cold stone floor. The air grew thick and heavy, crackling with the king's silent, unrestrained fury. Marcus struggled, his muscles straining against the invisible weight, but he was as helpless as a fly caught in amber. Lycaon rose slowly from his throne, his movements fluid and predatory. He descended the dais steps, his silver eyes blazing with a cold, white-hot rage that promised annihilation. He stopped directly in front of the prostrate Marcus, looking down at him with utter contempt. "You dare," Lycaon hissed, each word a shard of ice, "to enter my home, insult my mate, and attempt to lay your filthy hands on my queen?" The word queen hung in the air, a death sentence for Marcus's arrogance. His eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, darted from the furious king to the pale, trembling girl on the dais. Queen? It was impossible. You speak of flaws, Lycaon continued, his voice a low, terrifying growl that echoed in the cavernous room. You, who are so blinded by petty prejudice that you could not see the diamond in your midst. You speak of weakness. You, who rule through fear and intimidation because you lack the true strength of character to lead with honor. You cast aside a soul of immense courage and compassion because you were too small, too insignificant, to recognize her worth. He crouched down, grabbing a fistful of Marcus's hair and yanking his head up, forcing the terrified Alpha to meet his gaze. She is not a stray. She is not a curse. She is my fated mate, the future Luna of this kingdom. Her name is Alara, and you will address her as Your Majesty. Now, you will apologize to her, and you will beg for her forgiveness. Tears were streaming down Alara's face, but for the first time in her life, they were not tears of pain or shame. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief, of catharsis. Every cruel word, every scornful glance, every moment of humiliation she had ever endured was being answered for. He was defending her. He was validating her. He was showing the entire world that she was not worthless. She was cherished. She was his. Marcus, trembling under the crushing weight of Lycaon's power and the terrifying reality of his mistake, could barely speak. I did not know. You did not care to know. Lycaon roared, the force of his voice shaking the very stones. Apologize. Now, forced and humiliated, Marcus turned his terrified gaze to Alara. Your Majesty. He choked out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I am sorry. Please, forgive me. Alara looked down at the man who had shattered her life, now groveling at her feet. She felt no triumph, no desire for revenge, only a profound sense of pity for his blindness, and an overwhelming wave of love and gratitude for the king who had just rebuilt her world. She gave a slight, regal nod. It was enough. Lycaon released Marcus, shoving him back to the floor. Get out of my sight, he commanded, his voice dropping to a frigid whisper. Take your pathetic delegation and leave my lands. The trade alliance is denied. If I ever see your face again, I will not be so merciful. Now go. Scrambling to their feet, Marcus and his men practically fled from the throne room, their arrogance shattered, their retreat a shameful, hurried affair. The great doors boomed shut behind them, leaving a profound silence in their wake. The moment they were gone, the immense pressure in the room vanished. Lycaon turned to Alara, the fury draining from his face, to be replaced by a gentle, concerned expression. He mounted the dais and came to her side, his hand hovering near her, as if afraid to touch her. Are you all right? She could not speak. Instead, she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in the hard muscle of his shoulder, and sobbed. She cried out all the remaining pain, all the fear, all the years of loneliness, washing it all away in a flood of cathartic tears. He held her tightly, his strong arms, a circle of absolute safety, stroking her white hair and whispering soothing words until the storm inside her finally passed. Later that evening, the last of the ice around her heart had finally melted. The confrontation, as terrifying as it had been the final, decisive act that broke down her walls. It was not just that Lycaon had defended her. It was that he had made her see herself through his eyes, not as a broken thing, but as a queen. She found him in the glass-domed garden, standing among the moon-dusted petals of night-blooming jasmine, looking out at the star-dusted sky. She walked up behind him, her steps silent on the stone path. He turned, sensing her approach, a soft smile gracing his lips. The moonlight caught in his white hair, making him look ethereal, a king from a legend. She stopped before him, her heart calm and certain for the first time in her life. "You saw me," she said, her voice clear and steady. "When I was invisible to everyone else, even to myself, you saw me." "I saw my heart," he replied simply, his silver eyes full of adoration. "I saw my home." She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek. He was real. This was real. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding certainty. "Marcus rejected me," she said, the words no longer holding any pain. "He set me on a path of snow and sorrow. But that path, it led me to you. It was not a curse. It was my destiny." She took a deep breath, her pale eyes shining with a newfound confidence. "I am not afraid anymore. I accept the bond, Lycaon. I accept you. I choose you." A look of profound relief and joy washed over his handsome features. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "And you," he murmured, "always." He tilted her chin up with a gentle finger, his silver gaze searching hers, asking a silent question. She answered with a soft smile, rising on her toes to meet him. Their first kiss was not a tentative exploration. It was a cataclysmic event. It was the meeting of fire and ice, of lightning and earth. It was 1,000 lonely nights, ending in a single, brilliant sunrise. It was the feeling of coming home to a place you never knew you were searching for. The mate bond flared between them, no longer a gentle hum, but a roaring inferno, sealing their souls together for eternity. Their mating ceremony was held a month later, under the full silver eye of the moon goddess herself. Alara stood beside her king, not as a timid Omega, but as his equal, his queen. She wore a gown of spun moonlight, her white hair braided with silver bells, and she met the gazes of the thousands of wolves gathered to witness their union with a calm and gentle strength. Her past did not define her. It had forged her. She became a queen unlike any other. Her first royal decree was the establishment of a vast sanctuary within the palace lands, a safe haven for the lost and the outcast. Flicker and Ash were its first residents, growing into strong, handsome wolves who never left her side. She ruled with the compassion she had been denied, her kindness becoming the bedrock of Lycaon's powerful reign. Her perceived flaw, the albinism that had once made her an object of scorn, was now revered as the sacred mark of the moon-blessed queen. She had been the feral Omega who raised orphaned wolves in the mountains, a ghost in the snow. Now she was a beloved Luna, a beacon of hope, standing beside the king who had heard her howl of pain